right, this is the screen we're gonna look at. I mean, the part of the purchase list agreement we're gonna look at. This paragraph 9, waiver of marketing and delayed entry through the MLS. Can you guys hear me in Zoom land?
Yeah,
I got Dorothea.
Dorothea's-
Somebody's going yes. Okay.
Hands up.
All right. This is for those of you guys who were here last time. I know we went over this, but we're gonna do it again because we went over last time. So I wanted to go over this for, was there anybody, was everybody, if everybody in the class was here for the last part of the last class, we don't necessarily need to do this. So is there anybody who wasn't here before? You weren't. Okay, good. Because it's a weird paragraph. And that's why I wanted to start. I wanted to make sure that we went over this one in detail. What's weird to me?
I agree.
This is the paragraph that you, where you're telling the MLS and your client exactly how you're going to treat the marketing of your property. So this paragraph actually feeds into also our clear cooperation guidelines. And that's why it causes me a little bit of grief because the clear cooperation was not straightforward for me. I don't know if anybody else didn't think it was straightforward, probably not, sure it was just me. But so this paragraph, it says the section is to be completed only if property will not be entered into the multiple listing service within 48 hours of the beginning of the term date set forth in paragraph 2. Now, how many of you guys, and you don't show your hands, you guys online have to like pipe in with your voice because I can't see you. How many of you guys sign your listings with your clients well in advance of publishing it in the MLS because you have things you're going to do for them? You're going to get a floor plan, right? I got Dana here. I've got this person. What's your name? Nicholas. Nicholas, Carrie, you know, okay. So at least 3 people in here, maybe some folks online.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Who is that? Dorothea. Okay, cool. So, you know, this is something that I do all the time. So this paragraph always caused me grief because then I'm like, wait, what do I put? And so, you know, do you say you're not going to market it because then it, you know, or do you say you're going to market it later? So there's a couple different ways to go about this, I think, and Alice is here, so she can also clarify for us what she thinks is the right thing to do, because I haven't talked about this beforehand, so she might have some corrections for me. The one thing to note is that this right here, broker may not conduct any public marketing of the property. Broker may only market this property within the broker's brokerage. Okay, so if you have not put this in the MLS, you can't do a little Facebook post out to your people, your friends, even if it's not public, it's just your friends, your closest friends, that says, hey, you guys, I got this house coming on the market. It's going to be a sweet deal. Let me know if you know anybody. You can't do that. You can't market it at all to anyone who is outside of your brokerage. And that brokerage is defined as Keller Williams, New Mexico. Well, actually, it's the market centers of Santa Fe, Keller Williams West Side, and Keller Williams Albuquerque.
And Los Lunas.
And Los Lunas. Okay, so it's our brokerage is defined as those 4 offices because we share, those 4 offices all have majority ownership by the same party. So it's kind of, you know, there's another company in town who does that too. They have other, you know, different offices, but they're all considered to be the same brokerage. So that's our situation. You can market this to our Keller Williams private groups on Facebook. You can send an email to the front desk, to both, you know, the front desk of each of the offices and say, hey, send this out to your people. Yeah, Carrie?
Clear cooperation also says we can do that.
Yes.
As long, well, clear cooperation comes into effect 2 times. One, if it's, we can always talk about it within our brokerage.
Okay.
So
Not just the office.
not just the office, and that's changed. We, Pam Woolley actually went to the real estate commission and said, you know, we're primarily major owners are Go Management. So that's the same for Santa Fe and Riverside. So therefore, can we send it out to that ownership? And they said yes. Another time, Clear Cooperation doesn't, you don't have to consider it, is if you don't have the listing signed yet. However, I would caution you.
Yeah.
If, I mean, you can talk to people here in the room or people on Zoom, trusting them. However, I wouldn't go out and, you know, just broadcast it until you get that listing signed. So
Yeah, because you're not
then Clear
protected.
Cooperation doesn't apply if it's not listed, however, not a good business practice.
Hey, are you people online? Can you hear Alice? Dorothea, I can see you. Can you hear her?
Yes.
Can, okay. I just want to make sure because you're way far away from the speaker. I mean, the microphone. Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, there's an information sheet about this multiple listing service, if you care to read it. And then the broker's MLS may also require a complete waiver form. Our MLS does not, that I am aware of, if you're not putting it in the MLS immediately. So we've got two options here. We've got option A, which is brokers shall not market the property through the MLS. And you have the seller acknowledge that they've been informed of the marketing benefits of doing so, and they've waived the right to do so. There might be some clear-cut cases in which you want to do this. You know that your client doesn't want it in the MLS for quite some time, but they've given you permission to do your own private marketing. Absolutely. In that case, check A. I would. However, if this is what I do. If you are in the situation where you've signed a listing agreement, it started yesterday, you're going to be collecting a floor plan, professional photography, all the other marketing materials that you're putting together about the property, and you know it's going to take a few weeks, but you know you're going to put it in the MLS eventually, then I check box B. And then I say broker shall begin marketing the property within 48 hours of. If you know a date, if you have a pretty good idea and your clients have set out a date, that's easy. You put in the date, right? Easy peasy. A lot of times though, you don't really know the date. You're like, well, I got to get a floor plan. I got to get photos. I might have to get staging. I got some stuff I got to do. And so what I have been known to do, and I'm looking forward to Alice's thoughts on this, is like in my case, I'll say, within 1 business day of receiving professional photography on the property. And then I let it be that. I don't typically do a follow-up amendment that says, and we put it in the MLS on such and such a date. I just let it
What
be.
you're doing is fine.
Okay, and Alice says that's okay.
I know. So you don't put a specific date.
I don't. So you can put a specific date, but if you have a task that you feel like you need to accomplish first, you can say within 1 business day of completing that specific task, whatever it is. And then you don't have to do a follow-up amendment saying, we went public in the MLS on such and such a date. You don't have to do that because you've got it in your records. If somebody else wants to know when, you have a record of when you got that task done and what the actual deadline was. So this is a great paragraph to talk about clear cooperation as it relates to the MLS. And so I want to pause here and open this up to questions in the room and questions for you folks online, and see if there's anything out there for folks. No? We're good? Oh, you guys are awesome. Well,
Let
Alice.
me just say, with Clear Cooperation, what it says is that you will put it, now you can put it in coming soon, which is fine. Just means when it's in coming soon, no one can see it.
Oh, that's a really great distinction. I want to make sure everybody heard that. So I'm going to say it really loud into the speaker that clear cooperation means that you cannot show the property to anyone unless it's in active status in the MLS. You can't show it to your best friend. Look at this great house. You can't show it to, a broker in your office that you pre-marketed it to, and they're, especially if you pre-marketed it to them and they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to see it on Saturday, but it doesn't go live till Sunday. You can't do that. Now I have had cases where somebody unsolicited called me because they, for whatever reason, they were unsolicited. I did not send them marketing. And for some weird reason, they called me, maybe they talked to the neighbor and the neighbor said, I think the house is going to go up for sale. And, and in that case, when it's unsolicited, I've been told that it's okay because we did not solicit that showing. And in that case, it's okay to show the property.
Yeah, I mean, if we can solicit it.
Yeah.
And we have had people write it up sight unseen.
Yeah.
That's typically what will happen. They'll write it up.
Without
They
having
know
seen
they
it.
can't see it, but they'll write it up and then they'll look at it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And then for the one business day, what a lot of people are doing, as far as NAR, they say one business day. So people are putting them in on a Friday, and then technically it doesn't have to go live until that Monday because Saturday and Sunday are not business days.
Say more about that one business day and what are you referring to?
Okay, so what the clear cooperation says, once you start advertising, if you put up a sign, if you go on Facebook, something like that, it has to be either in coming soon or it has to go active in MLS within one business day.
Okay.
So what people are doing, they're putting it in on a Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday are not business days. So then.
So they can have their sign up
they're
and they
doing
can do their
open
own
houses,
private
they're
marketing.
marketing, and then they push the button, it goes active on Monday.
Oh, wow. Trying to sell it themselves
Yeah,
For-
or
or
sell it within the office.
within the office. Okay.
And some of the smaller
That one makes me
brokerages are trying to fight that, but, because they're saying it's not fair to them, which I get, but, that is what NAR is. They're saying what NARs or some of the brokers who are fighting it, the smaller companies are saying, well, we work on Saturdays. Saturday should be considered a business day. But until NAR changes it, that's the way the rule is right now.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? And Alice, does that, if you do put it coming soon on Friday, you don't accumulate days on market then by Monday with
No,
GAR?
well,
You don't
I
accumulate
don't think
days
so.
until active.
Right, I
think.
don't think it's yeah. But then for coming soon, it can be in coming soon for 14 days.
Up
It
to
just can't
14
be
days.
shown.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's awesome. We made it through paragraph 9 alive. Very excited. Okay. Let me go back to the listing agreement here. Okay. So the next paragraph then is about tenant occupied property. I can't tell you how many listings I've come across in the MLS where the property is occupied by a tenant and the broker isn't insisting upon you attaching an addendum related to that tenancy to the purchase agreement. So we're going to talk about that addendum as it relates, even though it's not really a listing thing, I'm going to make some recommendations about that because for a variety of reasons. So if the property is currently tenant occupied, first of all, you must obtain a written consent from the tenant to photograph or make videos of the house. I'm trying to highlight this, but it's not going very well. Okay, so first of all, during the listing, you have to get permission from the tenant. If you don't have permission of the tenant, you cannot take pictures of the interior of the house and put them up online. And so that is actually, I'm going to give you, we're going to look at that real quick.
The reason that's now in there is because there was a tenant in Santa Fe who sued. So,
Because it's their personal property that they were taking pictures of.
I have a question. I'm in a situation right now where I'm the tenant and they're selling this house. Through text, does that count or does it have to be like actual paper?
It's short of form up there.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So you're selling a house and you are the tenant. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Well,
She's not selling it, she's
yeah.
just the tenant.
Oh,
yeah, I'm just the
The
tenant.
owner's selling the house.
Yeah,
Okay,
So
and
we
you
both
didn't
are
sign
selling.
one of these.
no, I didn't.
So they don't officially have your permission to put photos up of the inside of the house. on the MLS because it's your stuff.
I mean,
Ma'am?
I don't care. I mean, I'm just saying, I didn't sign anything, so like, you know,
Yeah,
because I did like through text message, I was like, yeah, that's fine. If we can take pictures,
Yeah.
we're under contract on our home. So,
yeah. So that's very nice of you. But, you know, as a broker, it's something to be aware of, especially too, if you're going to hold an open house. I mean, it's a big enough liability to do it for somebody who lives there, who owns the house.
Yeah.
You know, a tenant, if, you know, if their things were stolen while you were holding a house open for the, that gives me the shivers. Okay. So this is what the tenant consent to photography or videograph an open house is. So if you have a tenant occupied property, when you take a listing, you must have the tenant sign this, or you don't get to publish photos of the inside of the property. Or hold initials, because the tenant is asked to initial for consent for photography. I don't have my mouse, so I'm sorry, for photography and for an open house. Now this says, you know, the such open house may occur on dates. I don't put dates in here if I'm going to do an open house. I just say, you know, to be determined, to be as agreed, you know, by future agreement, that sort of thing. You don't have to define the dates up front. Just make sure that you do get specific permission from the tenant for that open house on April 17th, that you have permission from them to do that, and you have proof of that if you don't have it written in this document what the date is.
And then the next sentence says you have to give the tenant 3 days notice.
Yes, thank you for that. 3 days notice for an open house. Now, it does not talk about how much notice the tenant requires for a showing, but it's a minimum of 24 hours for tenant occupied property. So you can count on that when you have a tenant occupied property, that they need at least 24 hours notice before they're required to give authorization for an appointment to show, and they're not required to give authorization either.
And that's not
That's
a
a
business
discretion.
day thing either, right? So
No,
not-
it's 24 hours.
It's 24 hours, okay. Cool.
Yeah, not a business day thing. Then there's a notification form on here, which I've never particularly used, but it's, you know, it's an option for you. But then we've got the tenant to go ahead and sign off on this authorization. Okay, I see. It's got this thing over here that I can't, maybe I can do that. There we go. That way we're not looking at ourselves into infinity there. Okay. So I also want to show really quick. So here we go. It just talks about to photograph and to videograph or to hold an open house. So we've just talked about that and the authorization that you need to get from the tenant. But what I also want to show you is, now that you are the listing broker of a tenant occupied property, when you go to sell that property, you should have this addendum, the tenant occupied addendum, attached to your purchase agreement. There's a lot of things in here that are really crucial protections for your seller, and good disclosures for a buyer. If you're representing a buyer to buy a tenant occupied property, it's beneficial for all the parties. I want to talk about this for just a few minutes because I think it's really important that, you know, what I do for my tenant occupied listings is I upload a copy of this written the way that I want to see it come to me, the way that I know what my client, what my seller is going to do. And so I put it up there and I just give it to the broker and I say, please attach this with your offer. Make it as easy as possible for people. But if you're a buyer broker, I thoroughly encourage you to use this addendum anytime, even if it's a residential house with a tenant, you know, the tenant might be moving out in 3 months, you still want to do this. Clearly, if it's a multiplex of any kind, residential income property, I would recommend that you use this. So what this does is it has provision to make sure that the rental agreements and any verbal agreements are disclosed from the seller to the buyer. So it gives the buyer recourse to obtain the written lease agreements, which of course everybody's like, oh, I'm going to send them anyway, but it's just official. They're going to get the lease agreements, but there's also a lot of times some oral agreements. I can't tell you how many, you know, I have one particular client who that's all he does is just, he talks about his agreements with his people and he never puts anything in writing. So what you end up doing is you end up writing up a summary of what he's, you know, here's what the leases say, but here's what they actually do. And you have to let the buyers know about this. And that's what B is about. All written amendments or supplements to the rental agreements or a summary of any oral amendments attached as Exhibit B. So, you know, I should have actually pulled a sample of that. I don't think let's see. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. Yeah, no, it's not gonna work. I'll have to go look for it, and I don't want to take the time to do that. But yeah,
So if you're putting it in the MLS, you would need to put the 2010 in addition to Exhibit B, which would be their lease.
I did, absolutely. I went ahead and put up that Exhibit AB. I called it just, you know, I don't put the lease agreements up in the MLS because I believe that contains personal information about, you know, it contains tenant names. And I don't think that's appropriate to put in the MLS, but, you know, a summary that does not include the tenants' names, I can put that in the MLS. And then after we go under contract, I can provide all the, you know, a summary with the names or the leases too. But yeah, I put the summary up there because I want them to know.
Or something.
Yeah, Exhibit A.
Yeah.
I called it Exhibit AB because it had kind of both of these, you know, but in this case, you might want to call it, see, this is Exhibit B. They call it Exhibit B in this addendum. So I referenced it, you know, whatever. Yeah.
I have to run, but let me
Yeah,
just say a couple things
Yeah.
about tenant occupied properties. You want to get a copy of that lease because we had one recently where they signed a 1 year's lease and the tenant did not have to be out until August 1st. So make sure you know that and put that in the LOSO comments, tenant occupied until August 1st.
That's a really good point. Get the leases before as part of your collection of the listing documents. Super important. Thank you, Alice. Yeah, you want to
And-
copy that.
Another thing to keep in mind is those tenants have probably paid a security deposit or I don't know about first last month's rent, but there's probably a deposit that existing seller has. So if the tenant is holding over, then that seller is going to need to credit that deposit to the new buyer, because when that tenant moves out, they're going to want their money back.
Right. And that's another reason why it's really important to do this addendum, because this addendum will make sure that process that loop gets closed, because there's an estoppel certificate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, Trevor?
So that was my main question, was it when a person is purchasing a tenant occupied property, they're also purchasing the business arrangement between the property and the tenant
Correct.
and all pieces to that puzzle, which is the refund of the deposit, with everything that was agreed, all finances. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful to know when you're making your offer.
Also, you want to make sure which appliances are owned by the landlord and which are tenant.
Yeah.
Because we've had cases where there was this really nice refrigerator and we said the refrigerator stayed, and then when the tenant moved out, that refrigerator went with the tenant, and the one that was owned by the landlord was the one in the garage that didn't have a handle. So be really careful on that.
I was going to show you, here we go. Thank you, Alice. I really appreciate it. I was going to show you this really quick. I know we're dwelling on this, but these are the kinds of things that I think we just hardly ever get to in a class like this. So I wanted to just go deep dive, as it were. So this is an example of a agreement summary, for Exhibit B that we just talked about. So this was a fourplex. And so, you know, this was just something I made up. I didn't get, your lease terms, your seller might have some specific lease terms that aren't listed here that you might want to include. But you do want to say, hey, how much is the deposit? Do they have month-to-month tenancy, or are they, do they actually have a lease through a certain period? Or can they, they're basically subject to 30-day notice. How much is their actual, see, I have got rent written on the lease, and then what the tenant is actually paying, and they're different.
Could you just black out the names on the lease and then just put the lease in there? No, that's not.
Since you have to give the leases to the owner anyway, to the new buyer anyway, I just wait until after we've gone under contract, and then like the minute we're under contract, I'm like, here you go.
Yeah.
Oh, I meant to put in MLS.
No, I wouldn't put the leases in the
No,
MLS.
okay, so then I totally misunderstood the question.
Because everyone will see it.
Yeah. I wouldn't put, now, and so this is not something that went, did it go in the MLS? I don't think it did. Anyway,
Making this seems like way less work than blacking out everything on a lease agreement that you
Yeah.
need to black out.
yeah.
I like that.
And then, in this case, for instance, like Alice was saying, you have to be specific about what appliances convey with the property and what doesn't.
I'm gonna put
So-
serial numbers now.
Huh?
I'm gonna put serial numbers now after that story.
Oh, I know. Wait, wait,
Frigidaire unit serial number.
yeah. So, so this tenant occupied addendum is really important to make sure that you convey the information, the current information that you collect. First of all, that you collect it, that you have it. And then down here on, so rental package, this is basically, it's just kind of restating, everything that you want to provide to a buyer about the property. But estoppel certificates, this is what Alice was talking about when she said, you have to make sure that that if there's a deposit that the buyer has paid, that's accounted for. Likewise, if you're any time of the month that you're closing, there's going to have to be a proration of rent, right? So that they need to know how much rent has been paid. Are they current in their rent? And this is what an estoppel certificate will do. So this paragraph is about making sure that the owner is going to provide an estoppel certificate for each of the tenants and their units, so that the title company can do the prorations as necessary. Or, if for some reason the seller is not going to provide them, the buyer needs to know that. But I think it's always a good idea to do those.
I have a dumb question.
There's no dumb questions.
What's in the stop list?
That's, do I have a copy of one? Let's see. It's really just a questionnaire. Here we go. It's a questionnaire. Here's one. This is a current listing, actually. It's blank because, so you can see it's just a list of questionnaires. What's the start? What's the end? It's a very detailed explication of what the unit's financial disposition is, when the lease starts, when it ends, what deposit is due. And this is the information that the title company will use to prorate the rent, to assign any deposit money. Let's say, like Alice was saying, you've got a tenant that paid a $500 deposit and they're staying. So the seller at closing needs to put $500 into the transaction that goes to the buyer. So the buyer has that $500 to give to the tenant when they move out. So that kind of the title company, God bless them, they handle that flow of money by using this estoppel certificate.
This is the business arrangement, basically. From
Yeah.
what title seats.
Yeah, but it's a very detailed document and the tenant has to sign it also. So what I do is I always, I'd save this till last. Like once the inspections are done and resolved, once the appraisal is done and resolved, then I'm like, all right, now I'll do the estoppel certificates because the landlord's got to go over there and get everybody's signature.
Mhm.
So we save it for last. I save it for last, but it's always a good thing to do. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So this is,
Sure.
yeah. Yeah, it's like 2 or 3 pages of, there is 2 pages of questions. What appliances are included, just everything. So that pretty much covers tenant occupied property, I hope. I think I've pretty much finished the addendum here. So, oh, another really important thing to note, number 7, no change to rental agreements. Once you are under contract as a listing broker, if you have a tenant occupied property and it's under contract with a buyer, your seller cannot make any changes to the agreement that they have with the tenant. They can't raise the rent, they can't reduce the rent, they can't give back part of their deposit and take it, they can't do any of those things. They can't give them 30 days notice because they, set the kitchen on fire, whatever it is. They can't do any of that without permission, written permission from the buyer. This just says, of course, that the security deposits and prepaid rents shall be credited to buyer at closing. The title company will take care of that. So this is a pretty important addendum if you have a tenant occupied property. Any questions from online? No. No, okay. All right, compensation. I think we're all pretty familiar with this property, I mean, with this paragraph. So agreement to pay compensation. Oh, yay, they fixed it. In the event the following, the seller agrees to pay brokerage firm, which is the business entity of Keller Williams, not you personally, compensation for the sale of the property. I have 6% in here. That's, of course, it's negotiable. Of the list of the sales price plus New Mexico gross receipts tax. You can also do a flat fee. That's an option with this form. I believe that if we checked our policies and procedures document, I wish Alice was here for this, but I believe if we checked our policies and procedures document, Keller Williams prefers that you do 3% if you are not capped. Yeah, you know, because you're then affecting the profit share of the office. If you're capped, you can, you know, I don't imagine it really matters to them what you put in there.
I think our agreement says that we offer the buyer side 3% if there's a reduction.
Correct. And Keller
So-
Williams policy is that we always offer the buyer side 3%. That this is just for the listing side I was talking about. So, but yeah, Trevor's
So you
right.
can ask 6% for listing and then 3% for
No, this is actually
total.
That's the-
a really good question. You touched on a confusing point. This 6% is the entire compensation that goes to Keller Williams Realty. And then in the next paragraph, we'll talk about how Keller Williams shares that with another potential brokerage in the transaction. You know, whoever the other, this is just for the listing side collects the whole 6%, and then they share the 3% with the buyer's broker. I mean, presuming it's 6 and 3. I mean, it can be whatever. But there's this GRT location code. This is kind of well, it's new for me, but you know, it's been around for a couple of years now. So I wanted to show real quick where to go get that in case people want to know. So I have this, I'm going to put this up here. And I can, I have these links. I put them in a document because I can send them out. You know what? I'll just put it in the chat. Because I know you guys are going to be like, where is that page? So
I have mine bookmarked on Nova.
yeah. Oh, and that's it. Ooh, Trevor has his bookmarked on Novalink. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds very impressive.
I just tagged it so that my Nova link now has access to it at all times. So just click it.
Okay. So if you know what that means, you might want to do that because it sounds like kind of a cool thing. But this is what I've been using because I'm totally behind the times. And it's just it's a map. I think Tigo created this, like when this first came out. And I've been using it ever since. And so what it enables you to do is search for any address. Here, I'll search for my listing. And it'll find it. If it's in Albuquerque, if it's in Bernalillo or Sandoval. I'm not sure it works for Torrance and Valencia. I honestly haven't tried it.
And that's what again?
This is gross receipts tax.
Okay.
So our commissions are paid by the seller. And let's just say there's $10,000 worth of commissions that are paid, you know, for all together.
I just didn't understand.
Oh, okay. There might be.
Is the website just a gross receipts website?
That's all it is. That's all this is it allows you to look up an address and then you can see that's the thing. If I click on it, it'll tell me, oh, there's the address and here is the gross receipts location code. Here's the location code that I need to put in my listing and in the MLS. This is a location code that we're obligated to put. It's required data for the MLS. This right here, boom, this location code is what we have to put in the MLS. So that is actually what goes, let me copy this link really quick so I can put it in the chat. That is what goes here in this GRT location code. You're going to put in, and this is also, again, going to populate, you're going to have to put this in your MLS listing. And that's what defines how much the tax rate is. The title company uses that to set the tax rate for all the things in the transaction that, well, not all the things, for the sales tax on our commissions. You will also, most sellers, when we sign a listing agreement with sellers, for the most part, they're paying this, they agree to pay this. But as a buyer's broker, be aware that there's some properties out there where it says no GRT, bank-owned properties, and some specific assets, the sellers do not agree to pay gross receipts tax. And when that's the case, it comes out of your commission, because Keller Williams doesn't cover it.
Taxes tax the state wants it regardless.
Yeah, so it gets backed out of your commission. But it's very rare, but just be aware if you see no GRT paid by seller, that means you're paying it. This is the term of the agreement. During the term of the agreement, the property is sold through the seller or any other source, or if the sale of the property is made by the seller within 45 days after the term of this agreement. So let's say, you canceled it. Well, no, I don't want to use canceled. Let's just say it expired on the 1st of April. And then 3 days later, somebody calls you up and they're like, oh, what happened to your listing? God, this happens to me all the time. What happened to your, I was looking and it disappeared. You're like, well, if you call me 2 days, but this agreement protects you for the next 45 days as procuring cause, provided that the seller has not signed an agreement with another broker. If they have not signed a broker agreement with another broker, and you show up and you knock on their door 3 days after the expiration of your listing and you say, I have a buyer who contacted me, and you guys make a contract, you are entitled to commission based on this. I would, however, if it were me, update the listing agreement while you're signing a purchase agreement, just to be safe. You don't ever want to get into a procuring cause argument because it's really complicated. Ideally, try and stay away from that. If a buyer exercises the option to purchase during the time of this agreement, then it applies no matter what, unless the seller enters into a written agreement with another broker. And this is canceled. I mean, they can't do 2 agreements at the same time. They have to terminate this one and enter into another one. Otherwise, this is, if you list a property and then forget to call them for 6 months and, they find a buyer, you're entitled to a commission as per this agreement. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Seller's not going to like that, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to list it and then not call them. Cooperation. This is what Nicholas was bringing up before. What happens to other, Keller Williams collects the 6%, but then we distribute out as cooperation this portion of the 6%. So in this case, it's 3% or half we're giving to the buyer's broker. It is Keller Williams office policy office policy that we always offer 3% to a buyer's broker. You even if you reduce your own commission as a listing broker, fine, but Keller Williams office policy is to always do full service 3% listings for the buyer broker. And then Roman numeral 3, seller paying bonus to buyer's broker. Hi. This is if you do choose to negotiate a bonus up front. It's not as common as I might. I mean, I don't know. Has anybody ever done this? Offered an incentive in the listing agreement like this and signed it at the time? No? Okay. But you can. We're not in the market where you need to do that. The sellers aren't given anything except access to their property, maybe. Okay, other events. So this is the things went sideways paragraph. So if the parties agree, this is the cases under which the buyer, the seller and the owner are in dispute, as to whether the listing broker is entitled to a commission. And so they have to be specific. So we're going to go through these really quick. The parties agree that if any of the following events shall occur, the actual damages suffered by the broker will be difficult to determine. Therefore, the parties agree that the owner shall pay broker compensation as follows. So, seller is not off the hook entirely. If during the term of this agreement, the seller finds another buyer ready, willing, and able to purchase the property and refuses to sell it, then you're still entitled to the commission on that. I have heard of brokers who have pursued owners for it. You're perfectly entitled. You found a ready and willing buyer and the seller was like, yeah, I decided not to want to sell. You're entitled. You're still entitled to the commission. Even they don't have to sell their house, but you're entitled to be paid because you did your job. Let's see, if the seller or finds anyone, okay, if the seller finds, if you negotiate a deal with a buyer and the seller defaults, if it's a seller default, not a buyer default, and you're also entitled to the commission, because just because they decided not to sell their house and open up a big old Pandora's box of legal issues, not your problem. If during the term of this agreement, the property is withdrawn from sale, technically, you're entitled to a commission. Me personally, I'm like, whatever, you got to do what's right for you. I'm not gonna hold somebody's feet over to the fire over that and ask for a commission. I'm like, your plans change. Call me when you're ready. I don't care. But
What about putting something there to cover like your signage or your marketing?
yeah, so that's not covered by this agreement. But what I would recommend is when you sign the listing amendment that goes with the change in status, so you're either taking it out of the MLS and putting it in withdrawn status, or you're canceling the listing entirely and taking it out of the MLS, or whatever it is you're doing, you're going to sign a listing amendment to address that change. And so if it's a termination, in the termination, there's a place where you can also put in other terms. And in that termination, I would say, and we're agreeing that you're going to pay me X number of dollars for all the marketing that I did, and then, it's up to you guys to figure out how you assure that you receive those funds. But you can totally do this, whatever you guys agree to. Yeah. And you may have that in your listing agreement, in the front, right? You may agree up front in the listing agreement, hey, if you cancel your agreement, you're going to owe me X number of dollars for all of the marketing that I did. And that's just something that you agree to up front. Again, how you get that money, is up to you guys, but I would recommend that you agree to that up front. It's a lot easier to agree up front and remind them of it than it is to get them to agree when they're ready to walk away or change, or their plans changed.
I had a listing when I paid like $400 for signs. Several signs, and then the dude canceled after like 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because COVID hit and his wife was moving back in. So, and I didn't charge him anything. I was just like, whatever.
Yeah,
But that
and we
was
do
the
a lot of that
first
as
thing where I was
brokers.
like, I wish I would have done that.
Yeah, we do a lot of goodwill stuff for sure. Yeah, COVID was a challenge for a lot of people. Does anybody have any questions about that compensation paragraph? No, nobody in here. Okay, compensation for lease. I'm not going to spend much time on this paragraph, mostly because although I do have my property management rider on my QB, I don't do it. And I really honestly don't know a lot about how this works. So I kind of don't want to try and be the expert in it right now. Is there anybody on the group that is actually interested in this paragraph because most people, we're not leasing. We're not doing leases in the MLS. And so this is going to be does not apply for anyone who's not listing it as a residential lease. Is there anybody online who really wants to know about this paragraph that I can get back to? No, I got one. Okay, so we're just gonna skip right over this one.
I guess I have one question.
Yeah.
And my only question would be, if that intrigues you, you'd have to have a residential or a property management license as well, right?
So You, as a real estate broker, you can do property management. I believe you, you definitely need to take, you have to take UORA. There's, I was talking about having my qualifying broker. So, you can do property management. Keller Williams, the office policy for Keller Williams is that we do not do property management in this office, primarily because Alice is not, is not QBing for property management. She's QBing for residential sales. So, the policy is don't do property management. Another reason why we just get this paragraph. Okay.
So when you say don't do property management, that means like don't get leases.
Don't manage.
Somebody said, hey, I'm looking for a rental, could you find it on MLS? To me, I'm
Sure. You can absolutely help somebody find a rental. What this is referring to is somebody comes to you and says, oh my gosh, I just bought this great property. I want to rent it. Will you manage it for me?
Oh, okay.
That's what we're talking about with property management. So then you're handling people's money, do rent and repairs, and that's a whole ding dang deal that
You had to check a box when you got your license. I mean, I remember when I got my license last year, it was, are you going to do residential sales or are you going to do anything with property management? And they wanted you to check a box if you were even treated.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I would think that there's an additional rider that you need for associate broker, even to do property management, but I don't know enough about it.
Property management, you have to have another additional 10 hours of continuing education to do property management, which just strictly is onto it. I did property management for like a year and a half before I came to residential.
Oh, cool.
Sales. So no, man, it's honestly, yeah.
It's not real estate.
It's not only that, you got to deal with a lot more in detail. You're in court probably 3 to 4 times out the week, evicting people, stuff like that.
That sounds
It's
exhausting.
not it's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Then you got to make sure that you're checking on each of your properties on a monthly basis, every 3 months basis. And no lie, I was just talking to my dude the other day, but like the 500, 550 studio apartment people out of 70 units, we have probably 3 dirty people. And sometimes when we were renting anywhere from like 2,100 to 3,100, we had more like dirty or not as clean people. Yes, it's a lot. Yeah.
Well, good. Welcome to sales. It's way more fun in sales, I think, personally.
But I learned a lot of investments. Great.
All right, we're going to do seller warranties and representations. So the seller is going to be, this is owner of record. Okay, this is what I do. I always get a pre-listing report from the title company, almost always. I take that back. You know what I always do first is I look up the taxes and make sure that the owner, as far as the city is concerned, is who is talking to me about listing this property. Because you'd be amazed at how many times those don't match up. So start with that and make sure that, because they're not going to, especially if they're not really the owner, if there's something weird going on, they're not going to tell you. So that's your best assurance to find out, make sure that you're talking to the right person, because they're going to sign this agreement and they're going to authorize that they're the owner of record. But I'm going to guarantee you they're not going to read this whole thing. And the only way you're going to know that they're the owner is if you have you're 80% there. If you check the tax records and the names match, you're 80% there. The safest way to do it is to pull a pre-listing package from the title company, and they'll tell you who the current owner is. Because sometimes, even though the assessor's office has such and such, the deed has been transferred within the family since then. So, it gets you about 80% of the way there, though, to look at the tax record. Also, you want the seller to maintain insurance during the listing period to cover personal injury and property damage. Make them aware of this, like remind them they're going to have strangers tromping through their house. And if they're concerned about this, get insurance, make sure that their insurance is sufficient to cover any risk they feel they might incur. It's for a short period of time. It's not going to cost them that much money to beef up their insurance while they've got all these people tromping through their house. Seller provided information. So this is calling upon the seller to disclose any adverse material facts about the property. The seller is obligated, and this is another thing you might want to just point out to them when you're listing this. You guys are obligated to tell me if there's anything wrong with the property because I have to let the buyer know. This is a liability for them if the buyer buys the house and finds out that there was a pre-existing leak that the seller didn't tell them about. You know, that's a liability for the seller. They're not getting off scot-free. They think they might be, but they're not, because it can come back and bite them. But I'm a full disclosure girl, so I'm all about disclose, 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 disclose. You can't disclose enough in my, you know, I think Ashley Strauss Martin would disagree with me because she changed the forms recently so significantly, but anyway, and then intellectual property license. This is letting the seller know that your photos that you took of the property are yours. And you're going to use them however you want, and they're yours in perpetuity. So the seller gives you the right to have those photos. They can't call you back afterwards and be like, "All right, all that stuff that you did, I want it back."
So that
You know.
big old billboard that you put up when they call and say, "Whoa, I didn't want you respond with."
Well, that would be.
You'd obviously
This is
have
more about like stuff that if you have photos of their house and they're like, I want those photos back, we're terminating our agreement and I want the photos because I want to use them for somebody else. I'm like, yeah, you can give them to them if you want, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
You do not have to give them exclusive. You can even say, here, use them. I don't care, but they can't prevent you from using them.
Mhm.
And nobody else can use your, like.
They
if you
shouldn't be.
listed something and it sold, and 5 years down the road, they couldn't use the old.
They
listing
do.
photos.
They're not supposed to. Yeah, they're not supposed to. People do.
I was always told like, don't ever. 'cause-
Well, you're right. You shouldn't. You were told correctly.
Okay.
You should not ever do that. People do, but they shouldn't. And so, if you ever, catch anybody doing that, you might want to just say, hey, my photos, please go get your own,
I'm that rude guy that I checks all the previous history anytime I'm looking at a property for my buyer. So I will look at the previous listings, and I'm that weird guy that notices that the photos from 2005 are the exact same photos from 2022. So I have bigger questions as to how's the kitchen not dirtier? Is it in
Right.
this actual condition?
And you're saying that, and I'm like, oh, guilty. Because I've
Okay.
actually listed the same property like 2 years apart. And it was a tenant occupied property. I'm like, I'm just going to use the same photos, because I can't get in there. There's a tenant in there now.
It's
But I'm
just
like,
just a yellow flag and a note.
I know, right? Trevor's after me, man. Okay, representations. So this paragraph always bugs me because it kind of breaks up the whole, I have to, in DocuSign, I have to actually be like, come on, you guys, you got to look at this. They always skip over this in DocuSign. But this is actually really important information for us to know. This first one, are there any delinquencies or defaults? Now, most of the time you're going to know about that, especially if you did a pre-listing package, you're going to know if there's any defaults. If there's a list pendants filed, for instance, you'll know about that. But it may be prior to that. So, this is something that you want to ask the seller. Is it a short sale? Some of you guys are kind of newer in the business. Do you guys know what a short sale is?
I'd like a
You guys-
description.
Yeah. Okay, so a short sale is when the seller, the homeowner, owes more on their mortgage than they will garner for the sale of their house
Outside.
after closing costs. So in that case, they're like hogtied to their house because they can't sell it because they don't have $10,000 to fill that gap, or they have the option of negotiating with the lender to take less and they can still sell their house. So a short sale is defined as any time, in this particular case, is any time the seller's proceeds are going to be less than what is owed on the mortgages.
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
A short sale is any time the seller's proceeds are not going to cover paying off the loans, the underlying loans. Now, another thing to raise the awareness of is you may have a seller who has a tax lien. That also has to be paid.
Mechanical ones as well.
or mechanic liens, in order to pass the property free, with free of clouds on the title, those will come out on a title commitment, and we'll do a different class on a title commitment, because that's really important stuff. But this is really just about, the mortgages. And, even if it's $2,000 short, you still have to know this and make sure that your seller has the 2,000 smackaroonies to bring to the closing table. Otherwise, you're not closing. And the buyer's going to be like, whoa, 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 my moving truck's in the van, is in the driveway. And the seller's like, oh shit, I don't have the $2,000, So, huh? You could, Mr. Nice Guy with the $400 worth of signs that he gave to his seller. I mean, yeah, you could do that. Has the seller declared bankruptcy or engaged in a loan modification? Again, these are also really important because they affect they potentially affect the title commitment that you're going to get from the title company as it relates to title insurance. So that's why these questions are important.
Like the forbearances people took, right? That's loan modification.
Yes, forbearance is a loan modification. And then if you're receiving benefits from an employer, right here. This is important because if they are receiving benefits from an employer, if they work for the lab and the lab is using their relocation company and you're working with the relocation company, you have to put this in here. And the reason why is because they're going to have a whole set of stuff that they're going to need you to do because it's a relocation company. And also, you do not want to find out after you've spent all this time with the seller. They're like, yay, we're going to list your house. And you do all this work. And then you find out, oh, it's through a relocation company. I have to pay the relocation company 42.5% of my commission. I didn't sign up for that.
Yeah, you did.
But yeah, you did. Exactly. Yeah, you did. So now you're going to get paid half what you thought you were going to get paid because you didn't get the answer to this question.
What's that new lead that they're offering in the office through realtor.com?
Op City.
Oh,
It's like
OpCity. OpCity's like that?
You said that?
Obsidian's not even new.
They
Well,
only take,
but
they only take 50%.
Yeah.
Only 50%.
Well, after do you think 50% plus your 6% for the company dollar, plus if you have in Capro, you're walking with, what was it? What did you calculate?
12%.
Oh, yay.
That's what
You
you
can buy a
come
cup
out
of coffee with that, maybe. Yeah, speaking of which.
12%, bro.
Yeah, I
And that
calculated
was, we
43%.
figured it was $3,300 on $1 million property is what you get with OpCity.
Wow. That's why I didn't know who they
So
were.
awesome that they signed us up for that.
I'll make Brock say that you guys can go ahead and just.
Okay, does any person have an option or right of first refusal to purchase the property? Again, super duper important information to know. If anybody has an option to purchase, because that gets in the way of your clear agreement with the seller. Hold harmless and indemnification. This is a hold harmless for the seller, between the seller and the brokerage. And this is a release that they're not going to come after you for, actually, and so this is a very general statement, very, very general, but there's also a specific hold harmless as it relates to COVID-19, which is thankfully, it seems to be somewhat waning, I'm sitting here without a mask, which, 10 feet away from people, but it was very different a year ago. So you may have some clients for whom this is still a very big concern, and signing that hold harmless is very comforting for some people to know that, if they come into my house and they get COVID from the inspector, they're not going to sue me, or whatever. So that's something that for certain people, I actually have them sign that addendum and we attach it to the purchase agreement so that all the parties are holding each other harmless as it relates to COVID.
So that's-
Freezing water pipes. That's the range.
So yeah, this is sort of meant to be a catch-all for, yeah.
So that will just signing.
This is very
this
general.
agreement Will cover them, or you have to get it debt?
You don't have to. This says acts of God.
Yeah, it literally says.
So as it relates to COVID being an act of God, it covers COVID,
Yeah.
but there's a specific COVID related one. You know, this is, you know, freezing water pipes, like Trevor was saying, maintenance, like we're, you know, people want to say, but I listed my house with you and I moved to California and you never checked on it once. And yeah, well, that may be the case. And maybe you should have checked on it more often, but it's not your job to maintain the property. It's not. That's why we're not property managers, right? It's really not. And people get into arguments over it, but this paragraph is meant to help protect us from that. It's not foolproof, but it's there. Important notice to seller. We are not responsible when we hand over, when we collect offers, we collect 20 offers for every listing that we have, and we send them to the buyer, and presumably each one has a lender letter. We're not responsible to go through even one of those letters and make sure that they're authentic. And I've actually had this happen to me where a client gave me a letter and from a bank for proof of funds, and the listing broker got back to me. He's like, this doesn't look right to me. And I'm like, oh my God, didn't even occur to me to check it. I was like, dang, you go, you know, I'm so glad that he checked it. And he did. And it like the document was created by my client.
Oh.
That was the owner name. So, you know, but that's not necessarily, you know, as, you know, he wasn't responsible for that, but he took that responsibility on anyway. You know, he could have been held liable for it. Huh?
Were you responsible?
I have, no.
Yeah, because how were you?
So whatever happened with that, did you like get proof of funds or?
No. Ultimately, the short answer is no.
Yeah.
No, I
That's
did
crazy.
not.
Why would you, like, provide it? I got 300 G's, let's buy this house. And you ain't got no money.
I know.
What's
Some
going
people
on?
just like to create lots of,
Crazy.
you know, churning in the
What
water.
if they were bored? What if they didn't have a job and they needed something?
Service provider recommendations. Boy, this is a fun one because our clients, who do they know? They're all like, who should I use for a home inspector? My roof needs work before I list a property. Who would you call? I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? They're constantly asking us for referrals. This paragraph clearly says that we are not responsible for recommending stuff to them. Alice would tell you, if she were here, don't make recommendations. Now, I'm here, that's what we do. We do it. I personally have my clients sign an additional waiver. Like, you know, if the inspector has a bad day, they're not going to hold me responsible. Vendor, inspector, repair person, handyman, blah, blah, blah. It says on every list that I give out to my clients, you know, I'm neither warranting nor blah, 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 the services. And, you know, it's up to you to decide, Mr. Buyer, or ascertain if their license is current and, you know, all that stuff.
You could theoretically just kind of copy this. And put it on
You
your
could.
page and say, here's my recommendations as per.
Yeah. So just be real careful when you're recommending. You know, we've had, you know, there's been cases where, you know, somebody was just trying to do the right thing. They're trying to help their clients, recommended a vendor, and the vendor, you know, damaged the property. And then the broker was held responsible for it. And legally, I mean, the broker was held responsible. And in that case, Alice was also held partially responsible. So it's, you know, it happens, and it's, you know, to the best of us. So just be really super, super, super careful.
So all these people that are giving out vendor lists and stuff like that, because I know there's a whole bunch of guys with vendor lists that told me I have vendor lists. I'll give you my vendor list. That's not a smart thing to do.
Well, you're opening yourself up to a liability if you give somebody that vendor list and they use someone and then they're like, well, I wouldn't have called this person if it wasn't for you.
That's just like any piece of information you give out as a licensed real estate agent. Anything you say, they can construe as licensed information.
Yeah.
So just yeah, do what she said. Make your list and then put a little agreement that says that they're not going to hold you liable.
Yeah. No good deed goes unpunished, as they say.
I just, because I'm always looking and always asking around, like, do you have a guy for this? Do you have a guy for that? But that was great.
Inspection reports. So this is letting the seller know that if the buyer has inspections, they're not entitled to the reports. Because some sellers are like, well, they inspected my house. I want to know. this is letting them know that they don't get a copy of it. And a lot of time, I mean, these sellers don't read all this stuff, right? But this is here to protect us because we have sellers who are like, but I inspected my house, I want a copy of it. So this is here to let them know they're not going to get it.
But the buyer is entitled to a copy of that?
Sure, the buyer gets a copy of the inspection report, and the only time that the seller will get the inspection report is this is, if the buyer's broker is doing their job properly, they will only send over the portions of the inspection report that apply to their objections. They're not supposed to send over the whole thing.
So speaking exactly on this, I have a situation, not a situation, but something that's gonna happen, I think. So basically there's a house that's under contract, really pretty house. My buyer loved it. I've been kind of checking in because I know terminations have been happening a lot. And the listing broker was like, actually, we're at the ORW stage. This buyer broker is asking for a crazy credit that's not justified. She's like, my sellers are probably gonna, like, if you can't come to an agreement, we're gonna terminate. She's like, you've been persistent. Are your buyers still interested? They are. But now I'm like, so in that situation, if they terminate and then we go under contract, can we get those reports, or do the reports then get sent to the seller if it terminates, or what happens in that situation?
So if it terminates, the seller has the right to request in writing the inspection reports from the buyer. But
But they don't have to. Or if they do request, then I guess they.
yeah, I believe that if they're requested in writing, that the buyer is obligated then to deliver them.
I'm
I
just
have to
wondering
check.
because my buyer, of course, he's like, yeah, I'm still interested. He's like, but he's also like, well, wait, what came up on the inspection reports that they're asking for,
Right.
a quote unquote crazy credit.
What they will have, they may not have all the reports,
Yeah.
but what they will have is what the buyer's broker sent over with the objections.
Okay.
They may only have portions of the
Sure,
reports,
sure.
but presumably they could then provide them to you. I'm not going to get into the copyright. I know there's some
No,
of you
sure.
guys out there that are like, copyright. I'm gonna defer that. We'll put that off on the side for now.
My question would be, obviously not in this market, you don't have sellers paying for inspections. But if this was not this specific market, and the seller, accepts a contract where they're gonna be paying for some of the inspections, would they be able to get the inspection reports at that time since they're the ones paying for it, requesting it? Or
I'm
does
gonna
this still prevent them from getting those reports?
I'm gonna write that question down, and we're gonna get to it at the end because I want to go, we'll take 5 minutes at the end and look at the purchase agreement as it applies to that. Because I believe that the seller is not entitled to the reports.
That was my question, even if they purchase it, this.
Just like the
prevents them
appraisal.
from having the
They pay for the
entitlements.
appraisal, but they don't get a copy of it.
Yeah, cool, perfect.
So how do you explain that to somebody? Because that, from a seller standpoint, like it was me and I was a seller. That doesn't seem equitable that the buyer gets.
She's gonna go over it, yeah.
Oh, you mean about the
How
seller?
do you explain it to them? Like, because they're gonna say, well, that's not equitable. How come the buyer can see it, but I can't see it?
If they pay for it, you mean?
Yeah, or no, just like, period.
Oh, so this is how I explain it to them, is that this is in your best interest, Mr. Seller, that you don't see these reports. Because there could be information on those reports that you are not aware of as it relates to your house. And now, in the minute you are made aware, now you have to disclose it to your next buyer. So maybe you consider this as ignorance is bliss, because maybe you don't want to know what's wrong with your house, Mr. Seller.
So correct me if I'm wrong, if they look at the report, if they are given access and they look at it and they don't tell everything on that report as they relist the property, they have now broken the law.
Now they failed to disclose, right? Now they know stuff that they didn't disclose, and it puts them in a very precarious liability position to have a full home inspection report and not provide that.
And vice versa, when someone sells a property that's tenant occupied that they've never lived in, then providing the document stating that they've never been tenant or owner occupied prevents them, it precludes them from having that knowledge.
Right. If they say on the seller's disclosure, I never lived there,
It's a really good way to describe that line.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. That's
Sure.
great. That's good.
So there's another little part of this that I don't want to spend too much time on, but there is the issue of copyright as it relates to these reports that are issued by homeowners and inspection companies. And so you get into this issue of, well, let's say the seller has a copy of the report because the buyer gave it to him, the buyer bought it, the buyer gives it to the seller, then does the seller have the right to give it to a new buyer because they didn't pay for it and actually is owned by the inspector? So it's crazy. So the best thing to do is just let each transaction have their own inspections, and you only get what pertains to your inspection objections, in my personal opinion.
And there's, in the same situation we're talking about with this and with that situation I was mentioning, if my buyer says, cool, and let's say they do give us the inspection reports that were recent, right? And he wants to go ahead and use those, right, to move forward. I can't remember, is there a form?
There is a form. So there's a form where you can request permission from the inspector to distribute their report.
Well, what I'm saying is there a form saying like, hey, I'm like, almost like you're pretty much, I guess, waiving your inspection at that point, right? If you're going with if the new buyer on the property is using the old inspection reports and not getting their own conducted.
I see what you're
Which we
saying.
try to get their own, but I'm saying if they're like.
They can waive the right to have inspections in the purchase agreement if they wish. They then waive the right to object to them. So if you're doing that, that means they've looked at all the inspection reports that they want to look at, and they've decided they have no objections, and they're just basically, that whole inspection waiver thing comes off. The contingency is just taken off the table. That's a big deal if you choose to do that.
So, but if at the same time you put in the purchase agreement that you're choosing to use the disclosed inspection report, then you don't remove the waiver
Correct.
timeframe, right? Because
Correct.
we're not waiving inspections, we're choosing to use the information already provided.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
And in that case, you can either do it as part of the, in that case, if you're accepting documents and you're not actually asking to perform any inspections, I would use the documents paragraph deadline. But in general, I wouldn't waive inspections.
Yeah.
Unless the earth is moving and mountains are being, all right, foreign sellers. This is so confusing, and I will try desperately not to make it be confusing, but if you're confused, then you're inhuman. Because it took me, like, I can't even tell you how long it took me to like get this straight. So this is a law that was designed by the IRS to protect their money. They want to get their money when the house is sold. So if the seller is a foreign person and they're going to Finland after this, they take their proceeds with them, and they have no way to get this money back. So what they're doing is they're saying, for high risk, for properties where we might be netting some cash, we want to make sure the seller is on the hook. So how they do that is they get the Social Security, they get the tax information for the seller. They want that tax information because they want to make sure that they can find that person. So if your seller is a foreign person, but they have a tax ID, yay, because that makes things a little easier. But so let me back up and say, first of all, this doesn't even apply for properties that are less than $300,000. And like, it has to be both. It has to be less than $300,000. If it's more than $300,000, it automatically applies. And they're going to use it as their primary residence.
For some reason, that line for always messes me up, and it's like spelling it out, and I'm like, what?
Because it's spelling out the opposite.
It's just,
That's why
yeah,
it's like
Yeah,
confused.
I know. It's like title company and set exceptions.
Yeah.
It makes your brain
Which I
explode.
feel like 300,000 is pretty, like, it should change that, they should up that number. 'Cause there's
Well, but then-
rental properties that are under
I
300,000.
know, right?
So if we're under 300 and the buyer is going to live there, then at that point in time, this is negated.
Doesn't even matter. Nope.
If it's above 300 and the person buying it is not going to live there, or actually, if either or, got it.
If it's above 300,000, it applies no matter what.
Got it.
The minute it goes 300,001 cent, this applies.
Or if it's under 300 and they're not going to live there.
Correct.
Just
If it's
as
an investment property, yeah. Good luck finding one of those, right?
Yeah. Under 300.
yeah, right. So, if this ever happens, I'm not going to go into, unless you want me to, what happens if the seller is foreign, how do you deal with this? It doesn't happen very often. I've had it happen twice in 17 years. So
was
it might
very
not be
easy
worth
to walk
spending
through
time
when
on.
When it comes time to it, you can just figure it out and walk through it.
Yeah, or call Alice or me or somebody who knows more
Yeah.
about, or who has done it before. There's lots of brokers, I'm sure, who have had at least done it at least once, or bit, who have been, but it's not, it doesn't happen very often. It really doesn't happen. But when it does, you're like, what do I do? Non-discrimination, of course, now we get into some of the more general, I call this the boilerplate, pages. I shouldn't do that, but that's what I kind of, do this with the sellers. I'm like, there's some other paragraphs that I regard to be extremely important around liability and access and, that sort of thing. And now I'm like, all right, seems to me to be more common sense stuff, like, non-discrimination, you guys, just because you own your house doesn't give you the right to discriminate. That housing laws apply. The vast majority of us here in town are not doing farms and ranches. So, I'm not going to spend time on this unless there's somebody on with Zoom that wants to. Gonna say no. Okay. Because we have other stuff. I mean, we got about half an hour left and we're just getting into the document section. And I wanted to show you guys how to get some of these documents before we wrap up. So, lead-based paint. We know that any property that was built before 1978 may or may not have lead-based paint. We'll never know, but it is definitely subject to the law that applies to lead-based paint. I get that question from buyers all the time. They're like, oh, it has lead-based paint? I'm like, no, we don't know that. All we know is that the law applies to this house because it was built in 1978 or before. So that's how I pose it. Like, I don't know if it's got lead-based paint. And I've never seen a lead-based paint disclosure say anything other than, seller doesn't know, seller doesn't care, seller doesn't have anything.
But just to be safe, don't lick the walls.
Yeah, there is that.
I highly recommend if you lick your walls, you see someone other than your local realtor forever.
I know, there's that.
It's one of those recommendations you get that.
I'm going to just pull up these lead-based paint documents real quick, because the minute you check yes on that paragraph, you as a listing broker are obligated to provide these two documents in your disclosures online. So the first one is the lead-based paint addendum to the purchase agreement. Why can't I make this smaller? This is the weirdest. No, I don't want to find anything. I'm sorry. I'm not used to this on my laptop. I'm not used to
You're trying to make what smaller?
I'm trying to make this thing smaller so I can, anyway, it's fine. So I always make it addendum 1 because, I don't know. I feel like it's, and then, this is pretty straightforward. This lead warning statement, this is, federal requirement that any buyer who buys a house that's built in 1978 or prior gets this lead warning statement. There it is. And then usually 99.9% of the time you have a seller who signs and says that they have no knowledge of lead-based paint and they have no reports. If they have any reports or they have knowledge, they need to disclose it. So far, I haven't met one. I'm sure they're out there. These lines are for initials, not X's. They have to initial on these lines as it applies to the knowledge that they have about their property. And then they have to initial on the bottom right. And then on the second page, this paragraph 3, you leave blank because this is for the buyer to fill out. So, you'd leave that, and you also leave this one. Okay, as a listing broker. Now, as a buyer's broker, you have to have the buyer initial both of these paragraphs, which means they got the lead-based paint warning. That's this right here is the paragraph from above. That's the paragraph they're legally required to be able to have. And then you, buyer broker, have to give your clients this pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Super easy to find. You can Google that. It's on the EPA website. Download it as a PDF and just send it to your person over email. And you've now given them this pamphlet. But they need that pamphlet before they can make an offer and before they can sign this. The buyers need it before they can sign this addendum. And then the buyer initials here as to whether they're going to, have a 10-day inspection period or waive it. Then you, the listing broker, you need to initial in both of these spots, A and B, in broker certification. Both, and then you buyers brokers, when you download this from the MLS, you guys have to initial these paragraphs as well, brokers. And then as a listing broker, your seller is going to initial down here in the right-hand corner. And then on the third page, it's all just, names, addresses, signature block, that sort of thing. I don't know why I'm in here twice, whatever. Sorry about that.
I've just been using like the whole, like if I've had a house that I had this already filled out, I use that as like a template. I'm like, cool.
Yeah, then you
Where
know.
do like, where do I sign? Where do I initial?
And then, so when you see them online, they're going to have just the seller side filled out, right? Well, you get this filled out by your seller, you initial it, you scan it, and you put it in the MLS so that your buyer's brokers can download it. The other thing that you should also be doing, in my personal opinion, I do this, is a lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting addendum disclosure. This is a disclosure document. It's not federally required, but I think it's a good idea because it lets everybody know that there are penalties where I come from. I'm sorry, I've just watched The Princess Bride. That as it relates to violations of lead-based paint law. So this is a disclosure that asks the seller to fill out certain questions. Hey, have you done any renovations that are on the property? And this is defined specifically as disturbing more than 6 square feet of the property since April 22nd of 2010. And that's all up here. It's all described up here. So if they replaced a window, doesn't matter.
If some unnamed individual tore an entire wall out between the living room and the family room.
That, yeah, if it's more than 6 square feet, then yeah, if it's a pony wall, maybe not, but more than 6 square feet, then this disclosure addendum applies. And if the renovation happened after April 22nd, 2010. So then there's some questions that the seller is obligated, that I ask my sellers to fill out. Sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know. But it's also, like I say, I'm of the mind that you can't disclose, you can't disclose too much, in my personal opinion. This also lets people know that there are penalties as it relates to doing some of this work under, without using a lead-based paint contractor. Most of the time, sellers, it's the first time they've ever heard of such a thing, because you can't find a lead-based paint certified contractor. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's just, and there are no lead-based paint police that I know of, but it's not my job to figure all that stuff out. I'm like, I just want to let you know, I'm just a messenger.
So I guess that would be my question. If I'm approaching this, I find this information in the middle of my listing conversation, like as an owner who's done renovations on my house that are
And you're like,
absolutely not within bounds, but they were done by contractors and me. That's my question. I've had people tell me, no, you're gonna have to have it re-inspected, tagged, they're gonna have to open walls. I mean, if I'm trying to sell my house, I'm now freaking out about $30,000 to $40,000 worth of ripping out walls, just so you can inspect an electrical cable from 10 years ago. So that's my question. If you approach this conversation and you find that they've done stuff, does it stop your conversation, or now?
no, I just have them fill this out.
Just do this.
Yeah.
Thank
And then I attach it to the seller's disclosure.
Thank you.
It's an addition, it's an addendum to our seller's disclosure that we have now.
You just removed a huge stigma and black cloud over working with listings. that have been
Renovations.
DIY
Yeah.
renovations.
Yeah. And also, if you're the owner of the property yourself, if you're doing work on your own house, it doesn't apply. It's when you hire a contractor that this applies,
Cool.
I believe. I should probably check that.
Either way, if there's been work done, disclose it. Disclose.
Yeah, here we go. Owners who perform their own renovations on their owner occupied housing are exempt from this.
Random Form 2315. I'll look at that for more information. Thank you.
Yep. Any questions about lead-based paint?
Yeah. I
Yes.
have just one last one. You said, there were 3 or 2 things that you wanted filled out, and that was the lead-based paint addendum So the purchase agreement and then the lead-based pamphlet and then the lead-based.
Okay.
Renovation, repair and. Or no?
So there's two things to fill out. One is this lead-based paint. Oh, sorry, let me go back here. A lead-based paint addendum to the purchase agreement,
Okay.
which is this one right here.
Yep.
It's a NMAR form, don't tell me, 5112. And then there is this disclosure addendum that and it's 5112A, and I attach this to the property disclosure. This is really more of a property disclosure. It's not a federally required form or anything like that. It's really just gives the seller an opportunity to disclose what they've done. And then that pamphlet that you were talking about, that's part of when you have a buyer who's purchasing a house that was built in 1978, you got to give them that pamphlet somehow.
And that's actually part of it's in the library of forms. I just added it
Oh.
now for transaction desk. And I
Good.
literally just looked up exactly what it was called. It was Protect Your Family from Lead. That's what it's titled in
Mhm.
there.
It's the EPA version, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah.
So as that would be more of the buyer, not the sellers.
Sellers don't have to, they don't have to do anything with that pamphlet. That's
That's our
The
buyer.
seller's broker is what I'm saying, doesn't have to get that to him, it's the buyer broker.
yeah, the seller's broker has to provide these documents to a buyer's broker. I put them in the MLS. Yeah.
But can you clarify for me real quick, Maria? I've been having as the buyer's broker, and maybe I could be wrong, I made this up in my head. I have them sign all that before they sign the purchase agreement. Okay.
They're supposed to sign the lead-based paint addendum as prior to, yeah.
Isn't this supposed to be like 24 hours or something like that?
No, they're supposed to sign it prior to making an offer, like the public improvement district. There's a couple things they're supposed to do before they make an offer.
But you have to
Federally
sign that
speaking.
with the offer when you send it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
you can do it in the same DocuSign envelope.
Okay, cool. That's what I
Nobody's
was
gonna
doing.
hassle you for that.
Okay, thank
You know, if you want to put it before the purchase agreement, nobody's gonna care at that
I'm
point.
so
One
careful
step
with
up,
the time
just-
span.
Yeah. You can do that, but I don't
Okay.
think anybody's gonna hassle you if it's in the same envelope and it gets all signed at the same time.
The big key is as long as it's understood clearly before they make an offer that what they're offering on has this potential.
Yes,
That's the key. That's the legality here.
that's correct. So this lead-based paint paragraph, it talks about that addendum, right? And that you're gonna provide it. Sorry, here we go. I just messed that up. So here we go. The seller cannot legally accept a buyer's offer unless the buyer has received all of the following. So it kind of comes back on you, listing broker, to make sure that when you get your offer, it has one of these attached.
Okay, so
Okay. Now in this market, it's so, anyway, I don't have time to get into that. Just, it's a real thing. So, and then the repairs and renovations, this has to do with that addendum, that disclosure addendum. Myself personally, I always say that they will provide this addendum and I have them fill it out. Public improvement district. Okay. As per New Mexico law, the seller cannot accept an offer unless they have provided these disclosures to the buyer. As a listing broker, you have to put the public improvement district information up in the MLS, or you're putting your seller in jeopardy if you don't provide that information. Now, you could feasibly say, but it's available online, the buyer's broker can go get it anytime, but I wouldn't want to rely on that in a court of law. I just want to make sure that I disclosed it. Let me show you an example of one. I want to show you, oh shoot, I was going to put in the chat, I was going to put, this is the GRT webpage. Okay, and this is the PID webpage.
that's what I use. Yeah, you would.
So oh, sorry, I got too many things going on here. Okay. This is through NMAR, I believe, or no, I guess Swinless put this up. Anyway, you got the link now. So put this in your bookmarks. If you have a listing that's in a public improvement district, This is where you go to get the public improvement district disclosure. They're all, the gang's all here. All right, all the PIDs disclosures are here. So when you have a listing in the, and whenever you've checked yes to that, I think maybe there isn't yes. So let me open one of these. Let's do Aspire. Okay. This is what you're going to download as a PDF and attach to your MLS listing. And somewhere in here, there should be a signature page. Here we go. There's one. I acknowledge that I have read this notice and received a copy of this notice prior to entering into a contract to purchase the property. Every single one of these PID disclosures has a page like this. This is what you want to have your buyer sign when you make an offer. And listing brokers, you want to make sure this is attached to your offer when you get it, because you're giving your seller is an increased liability if they have not acknowledged receipt of it before making an offer.
So is this something that the seller should theoretically know that they're in a bid? Okay.
They probably do because they're paying more taxes. Most sellers will know because their taxes are going to be higher.
Okay.
And if they're paying attention, I would say most sellers would know. But some people may not know what it's called. Like they may know they're
May
paying
not
more
know
taxes, but
what
not
it
know
is.
what the name of it is. Or any questions about that from anybody online? Okay. Let me go back to all right, so I hope that was the PID stuff. So now you know how to find the public improvement district disclosure that goes with your listing if you've checked yes here. And then if you have a property that's in a homeowners association, there are disclosures that are associated with that. So our compliance requires that we attach, there's a seller's disclosure of homeowners association that we're required to include in our file. So I'm sure you've probably seen it. If you've done a transaction with Keller Williams, you've seen that disclosure. So I'm not going to necessarily go over it. But the thing to just to recognize as a listing broker, clearly we don't get these documents until after you go under contract, A, and also they take weeks and weeks to get, B, and C, they can be expensive. So depending upon the homeowners association that your seller participates in. And they don't, they take at least 2 weeks. So if you're writing offers or you're evaluating offers, make it easy on yourself and just, make sure that you've got a week to like get your escrow off the ground, get the title company on board, get everybody going. Most title companies these days are ordering HOA docs for their transactions, not all. So you really need to check with your title company if you're not familiar with them and make sure they're going to order those documents. And if they're not, order them yourself. Just make sure they get ordered. And remember that and try and make your dates so that they're, at least 2 weeks from when you think, if you can't order the documents until next Friday, because you got all this other stuff that you're going to be doing, earnest money and blah, 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 then you need to make your delivery date for those HOA docs 2 weeks from next Friday, because they'll take every last day to deliver those documents. And then the buyer legally has 7 days to review those documents before they have to, legally, they're given 7 days. There is an option for the buyer to waive that. There's an NMAR form to waive that 7-day option to review the documents if you're really tight on your dates and your buyer's like, I don't care, I've already read them. It took me 20 minutes, I'm good. You can have them sign that waiver of 7 days and on you go. You can close the next day, but you have to make sure that they waive the ability to have that 7 day.
Does that 7 days give them a termination option?
Yeah, just like a regular delivery
inspection.
objection resolutions.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the same architecture. Mediation. Okay, so there's an information sheet about this, but if the first step usually, and actually prior to mediation, there's a GAR ombudsman program, which is free, and they have a lot of success in helping buyers and sellers, find some peace together. So I would do that first, but if that fails, then mediation is next. and the parties agree to share any expense related to it. And if mediation fails, then usually arbitration is next, which, mediation is where the parties come to an agreement together. Arbitration is where somebody else decides for them. Like, I mean, not a judge in this case, but a third party will say, I heard your argument, and here's what we're doing, people. And you agree up front with arbitration to accept whatever it is they dictate the answer is.
Does that arise because you didn't do the contract correctly in some form? I just feel like everything is covered in the purchase agreement. Where would mediation, like,
Oh, just because it's covered doesn't mean it's,
they're not gonna argue?
here's a perfect example.
Thank you.
Buyer, the buyer's entitled to their earnest money back. Clearly in the purchase agreement. That's why I use the word entitled. Buyer is entitled to their earnest money back. They've followed every step of the purchase agreement, and they're entitled to it. But the seller's like, nah, I took it off the market for 2 weeks and and they don't want to give it back.
That's mostly earnest.
That's an example. The buyer's entitled to it. And, in that case, you could try and go under mediation. That costs money. So maybe the buyer's like, I don't want to pay money to get money back that's mine anyway. And they might choose another course. But, that's a case where there shouldn't be a dispute.
Right, because it's covered.
Because it's covered. But, you get these people who sometimes think they know what,
Gotcha.
Expert assistance. This is the paragraph that says that we are not going to give them advice outside of our expertise. Don't try and tell them whether they can write off the proceeds of their, on the whoop-de-doo with the 1031 and the la la la. Don't go there. If they have a question about zoning, give them the number to the local zoning authority. It's so much better because no good deed goes unpunished. It's a simple question. Is there a water line in the street in front of this lot? Well, you might ask that question and you get a simple answer, but the buyer, if they were calling, they would have been, well then, how far is it? And blah, blah, blah. Like they might have a whole nother bunch of questions. And if they make the phone call, they can ask those questions. So, try not to do too many good deeds in your life as a real estate broker, this being one of them. If somebody, there is a place obviously for us to provide information to try and be helpful to our people, but sometimes it's way better for us to give them the tools to do it themselves. They're going to be property owners. They should be, this is a learning curve for them too, and they should be stepping up to the plate to learn about their new asset. Consent to electronic transmission. Yeah, we always just check due on this, of course. We're all going to be sending documents around with the email and DocuSign and .loop, and so nothing prohibits us from doing it not electronically. You can sit down with your people and sign it wet sign too if you want. Doesn't matter. Just it's okay to send PDFs around. That's what this paragraph gives you the right to do. Attorney fees and costs. Here's the arbitration and litigation. This just says that whoever wins shall be entitled to an award. So you don't want to lose. So, kind of like there's a game out there. What is it? I guess it's Scrabble. Don't challenge it unless you have a pretty good feeling that you're going to win it. Time is of the essence. This is just saying, this is a bucket clause to make sure that people keep rolling. We need to keep moving here. We can't just be spinning our wheels and keeping on doing extensions. Nobody's obligated to keep doing extensions. Force majeure. Yeah, we've lived that for the last 2 years, right? So we all know what that is now. So I'm not going to go too far into that. I think, oh, you know what I wanted to do before we run out of time? It's 2:46. There was one other thing that I wanted to cover, and that is the estimated property tax levy, because we looked at the other two things, and I think this paragraph was before. So this was something that we covered in the first half of this, but I didn't have the links handy. So I wanted to just show people, most of you guys have probably done this before, but for those of you who haven't, this is the assessor's website. And this is how you look up property taxes, right? The great thing about going to the assessor's website, well, first of all, it's a little slow. Oh, no, it came right up. That never happens. Yay. Okay. Linda and Lorenzo are my
The
poster
assessor
children.
versus treasurers.
Yes. Yeah, I want to get to that. I want to show them the difference and why it's so important that they use this one.
Don't go to assessor.burnco.gov.
Come on. So it's still spinning over here. It's a little slow, the assessor's office, but I'm going to do this just to show you the difference between the assessors and the treasurer's office, because there is a big difference and it's really important, the distinction between the two. Tax calculator. It's still spinning over here, waiting. It's waiting. Come on.
Did you talk about that one paragraph? I think it's paragraph 10. How many days to put in there?
I didn't actually give a specific set of days. Do you want to, this is what Alice is talking about. Let's go back here and I want to hear what, oh, that's waiting. This is going to be,
3 days.
in mine, I
I
had
could be
45.
wrong with paragraph. Yeah, I think it's paragraph 10, but I could be
Yeah.
wrong on that.
Compensation,
Yes.
this one, yeah. So I had 45 days in mine, but I want to, so she's talking about, the question Alice had was, did we talk about how many days to put in this paragraph right here? When you have the protection period that we talked about after the listing agreement expires, and I said, you guys, we're still entitled to a commission. Alice wants to talk more about the number of days that you put in this paragraph.
Yeah, I would just say, I think 45 is good, but if you're taking a 6-month listing, you could also put in 6 months. The caveat here is if they relist the property with the Realtor, then that protection period goes away. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that.
Yeah, that we did cover. I just
Okay.
I didn't talk about the number of days to put in there.
Because some people put like in 3 days and that's not, or they'll leave it blank. So I would say definitely put, I think 45 is a good number.
Oh, come on. Ah, here we go. Okay, so it finally came up. Okay, so this is the assessor. So what I want to point out to you guys is there is a hugely significant difference as it relates to where you get your tax levy estimate data from, because it's provided from there was 2 different providers for this. One is from the assessor's office and one is from the treasurer's office. And I can't tell you how many listings I see out there where the listing broker has provided the information from the treasurer's office and not the assessor's office. So first of all, the statute, this is a law that we are complying with as real estate brokers. It's not from the New Mexico Real Estate Commission. It's not a guideline. It's not an office policy. This is New Mexico state law that we are required to provide this disclosure to our clients. And we're required to provide it from the assessor's office, not the treasurer's office. Now that may not, if that's not enough for you, that you're breaking the law, if you don't use the assessor's version over the treasurer's version, I want to show you in practice why it's so important. So if you look at these different disclosures, so come on. All right. This is stop with the cookies. Okay. This is the disclosure right here as it shows up from the assessor's office, the treasurer's office. This is the treasurer's office version. And you can see here, it's got the parcel ID, the market value, and the estimated tax. And it's got this very fabulous looking important paragraph and disclaimer. And it looks like it's very official and fabulous. And at one time, it was all we had. And that's, I think, how people got into the habit of using this, because when this originally became a law, it took the assessor's office several months or more to figure out how to accommodate this. And the treasurer's office did it first. So for a while, people provided this disclosure with the last year's tax bill to meet the requirement. And that was acceptable when there was no other alternative. But now we have the proper alternative through the assessor's office. And you can see here that the assessor's office disclosure is different. And what it has on here that the law calls for us to disclose the prior year tax and the estimated tax. And the assessor's office has both. Has the prior year tax right there and the estimated tax right below it. The treasurer's office does not have the prior year tax on it. So some brokers feel like, well, I'll just attach the 2021 tax bill and we're good, but we're not. So I encourage you guys as listing brokers, please be aware of that and use the right disclosure from the assessor's office. You don't need last year's tax bill. If you use it, last year's taxes is already on that disclosure. And as a buyer's broker, if you run across listings where they've provided the treasurer's disclosure, which you will, my practice is, I'm not out there to, fix the world. I just want my clients in compliance. So I sign what they gave me. I have my clients sign what they gave me, and I have my clients sign the right thing. And I put that in my file. So I have the treasurer's version signed and they sign the assessor's version. I've never, ever had a client say, how come I'm signing this thing that looks like it's the same thing twice? I've never had anybody do that. So that's my recommendation, is that you just have them sign the right thing, put that in your file so you're covered, and give the listing broker out there who, give them what they want. It's not worth arguing over. If you want to send them the other one and, tell them, that's up to you guys. I don't usually go there unless somebody brings it up for some weird reason. And that we are at 2:53. So I want to open this up for questions. We didn't quite finish the listing agreement completely, but the next one that I want to do is an estimate, going through and creating an estimate of closing costs for a seller, because that's required as part of our compliance file. So we're going to do that. I'm hoping that I'll have a Google spreadsheet for you guys to be able to take with you when you leave that class. That will be hopefully helpful. But now that we've got 5 minutes left, does anybody have any questions? And then, yeah.
So if I
Nicholas.
just wanted to go knock doors and try to get listings and have it filled out there. But would I need a listing agreement and let base, like what forms do I, if I was just gonna go knock doors and fill out stuff? Or is that not the right way to do it?
I don't think there's any wrong way to knock doors. I
I
mean,
just meant like if you have a listing agreement with you to fill out, what other form should I have?
I would say, before you go knock on doors, I would get the checklist, so you know exactly what paperwork needs to be included when you send your package in.
Okay,
There's a listing checklist and there's a buyer checklist.
all right.
Because what happens if you get somebody to sign a listing agreement, and it's like, oh, yeah, oh, we need the adverse material facts, we need this and we need that.
Right.
It's better if you get it all done at one time, because they're gonna say, well, you're having me sign so much. But if they do it at one time, it doesn't seem like oh, I forgot this.
That was the answer.
Okay.
That was just like, if I show up with just a listing agreement, I think that's not enough.
Right.
Okay.
I was going to go back to Trevor's question about the inspection reports.
Oh, and the
So-
legality on who actually owns it regardless of who pays for it.
Yeah, so that's going to
Obviously not in
be
this market, but-
more covered in there's an information sheet about this, which I encourage you to read. And in our NMAR forms, it has to do with, it's called look up inspector.
Random 2315, I think.
Oh, you know it by heart.
It was on there. You highlighted it. And I wrote
Okay.
it.
All right. So I'm going to go to the purchase agreement, even though this is sort of a listing agreement thing. Your question is really pertaining more to the purchase agreement. And it's this paragraph 22 inspections. I'm going to go down. It's like a 3-page paragraph. So we're going to keep going to the bottom. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, right here. So this is where it talks about making objections. actually, no, your question was if the seller agrees to pay for the reports.
Yeah, like obviously not in this market, but let's say it's in a buyer's market, buyers put in an offer,
Yeah.
seller's going to be paying for the reports and they agree. That other listing clause prevents them from getting access to the report, but they paid for it. That's where my question.
Right.
takes ahead.
So I think there's two things that pertain to this. One is up here in the top, it talks about who pays. And it says regardless of who pays, or it used to, let's see, God, I'm so over this laptop with the thing here. Hold on. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to point this out. Unless provided for otherwise in this agreement, buyer shall have the right to select all inspectors and order all inspections, even if the seller has agreed to pay for the inspections.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no provision that says that just because you paid for the inspection, you get the report. There's nothing in here that says that. What it does say is that let's see. If the buyer objects to an item on the document, the buyer shall produce the objections with a copy.
Entire document.
Oh, to a survey. That's for survey. Let's see. It says of the entire document.
No, it says they have to give the full inspection report if they object to one piece.
Okay, there it is. Okay, that's why, because it's a survey. All right, so this has to do with like to a document or a survey. This is like everything but inspection. So like, for instance, title commitment.
Okay.
There's an issue with the title commitment or an issue with the survey.
HOA.
HOA, right? It's the entire document. But inspections in particular are called out. And if a buyer objects to an item, then you only provide that portion and you do not send the entire report unless requested by the seller in writing. So the seller can request it, but here's this, you had a question, one of you guys, somebody over here, was it you? I think it was this person who was here. He had a case where he was going to potentially use the reports from a prior transaction and or wanted to. He knew that the parties were terminating and he knew that they had inspections and his buyers were fine to use those prior inspection reports. But I said the seller may not have them. And the only way the seller will have them is if the seller has put in a written request to have those reports prior to the termination of that agreement. He's got no control over that. But that's, once the contract terminates, the buyer's under no obligation to deliver those reports. The seller loses the right to them.
Even if they purchased it. I like
Even
that.
if they purchased it.
That's the key.
Yep.
Thank you.
Even if they purchased it, just like the appraisal. They don't get a copy of that either, even though they paid for it.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's fair. But do you want to add anything to
Well, I mean,
that?
sometimes if you're representing the seller, it may behoove you to not have the inspection.
That's what she was saying.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, you probably don't want it.
Information is power, and how much power do you want to hold at a time?
That's all I got for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So the next one in 2 weeks, we're going to do an estimate of seller's closing costs that you can put into your compliance file. And we're just going to do the seller side. I don't think we're going to do the buyer side. I mean, I'll bring it maybe just in case. We'll see. I think we're just going to do the seller side. That'll be enough, probably. A lot of numbers. Bring your numbers head. And then are there any other things like what's on y'all's radar screen? What would you like to see in a format like this? What comes after that for you guys? Anything you want me to just make something up? I can do that. Or we can go through the purchase agreement, or we can do, I had some other.
I feel like the next 3 to 6 months, someone's gonna rear its head that you're gonna need to have a class.
Well, and if that ever happens, let me know, right? Solar, this is all listings. This is all my listing stuff. We didn't talk about floor plans. We didn't talk about solar. We didn't talk about short sales. I mean, there's actually a whole nother thing that we could continue to do on listings as it relates to those specific pieces. They don't happen as often.
I think short sales wouldn't be bad to trigger our brains on.
Well,
In the
you're
next
not
year or
seeing
so.
any though.
Not right now.
Everybody's got so much equity in their houses, there aren't any short sales.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of skipped right over all that.
And luckily, the equity is growing beyond what's everyone refied.
And don't we just,
Everyone refied, they pulled their full mortgage back out.
Thank you, Alice.
Sure.
And now they're building equity again. We've gone 17% up since everyone refied, so
Yeah,
they're not going to go under.
yeah. You know, I mean, when this goes south, because what goes up must come down, you know, we probably will have some short sales happening when, you know, people need to sell 2 years after the bottom. You know, we're gonna have a downward spiral, not spiral, that's the wrong word. I mean, you know, right now, we're right where, if you look at the trend line, this is not something I made up. This is a Gary Keller thing. You know, if you look at the trend line from 2000, where the market was headed in 2000 up to 2006, and then it dropped, and then we started a new trend line,
Yeah.
right? But if you look at where the market was headed at 2006, and you keep following that trend line, that's about where we are right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, we're in line with that trend line.
Yeah,
But if you also look, it was like that bounce back after the dip. There was a rebound that tripled. And then all of a sudden it started to equate. Yeah, we're coming back. So like we're coming to a little bit of a dip, but it's really honestly a flattening of the curve.
but that's, it's just market correction. So
Uh-huh.
it's always.
Yeah.
Should have happened last year, but the Feds didn't want to stop growth, so they didn't increase rates yet. And now they've gone up like what, 2% in the last 2 months?
yeah, yeah.
So Maria, are you looking for ideas to continue doing a meeting every month?
Well, I mean, I was gonna try and do every other week.
Oh, gosh, you're ambitious. Okay.
I'm trying, like I have this one and I have one in 2 weeks. And then, you
How
know,
about every time I panic, I'll be the next class?
yeah, I mean, you know,
Cover this.
send your ideas to me or, you know, whoever, I know, you know, there's lots of people who are always collecting ideas for classes. If you guys want to, there's a topic that's coming up a lot for you guys.
Are you gonna do a purchase agreement? I know they just did one. Are you gonna do that or no?
I can, sure. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna stop Susan's the only one left on the Google meeting anyway. So, I don't know how to stop it. Bye, Susan.
Click the link button.
Okay.